Hello. I'm trying to set up a new studio in my attic, so to speak. Uh, it's fairly sparse as is. This is actually a room that the previous owner of this house used as a model train room. So, um, and I thought I would do a video on revolvers. Uh, My very first firearms video was featured this guy, my Smith & Wesson Model 10-7. It's unloaded, so don't worry. And I figured I would also introduce you to this one, which is another Smith & Wesson Military and Police, but a little bit more interesting. So, this is the 10-7, made in about 1983. It is an imported 10-7. Century Arms imported some of these foreign police trade-ins some time ago. Grips are in rather beat-up Magna-style grips, but I like them. Add to the charm of the handgun. I added this grip adapter made by a company whose name escapes me at the moment. This is in 38 Special, 4-inch barrel. Really nothing particularly special. This guy, on the other hand, keen-eyed viewers may notice the lanyard loop on the butt, smooth service stocks, 5-inch barrel, and half-round front sight. This one is a British Service Revolver. This one would have been made... I'm going to have to go back and re-look at the history. This is an off-the-cuff video. But this would have been made early World War II era. These are often called Victory models. Smith & Wesson did produce a Victory model for the U.S. government, which were mostly 4-inch 38 Specials with a parkerized or phosphate finish. The British Service Revolver, on the other hand, was a little bit different. It was in 38 Smith & Wesson, which is not to be confused with 38 Special. 38 Smith & Wesson is shorter and fatter than 38 Special. It's also a little bit weaker. There's a whole history behind that as well. 38 Smith & Wesson ultimately was something of a dead-end cartridge. And these British Service Revolvers were sort of the last hurrah for the 38 Smith & Wesson. Or, as the British called it, 380 Service, or 380/200. The British government in World War I had issued Webley revolvers in .455 caliber. And while those were without a doubt good revolvers and had reasonably good stopping power for a handgun, the British decided that it was a bit too much. The revolvers themselves were too big, and while the .455 Webley was not a particularly powerful round, the British felt like it was too powerful to easily gain hits for novice shooters. So they looked across the pond at the American offerings, and they adopted a 200 grain loading in the 38 Smith & Wesson. This was originally a lead round nose bullet, but due to various laws on warfare, they changed it to a non-expanding 170 grain full metal jacket round. I have no doubt that it was easier to shoot, but it is a little bit surprising that they would go from a big 45 down to a rather anemic 38, but that's what they did. They did not adopt this revolver. Instead, they had simultaneously two different revolvers, which were made in Britain, that were suspiciously similar. One of them made by Webley, and the other one made by Enfield. However, at the start of World War II, they found themselves seriously lacking in all manner of firearms, to include handguns. So, as in World War I, they looked over to America and contracted out for various substitute standard firearms. And this is what they adopted in addition to their Webleys and Enfield revolvers. And dare I say, I think this is probably a superior revolver to either one, though perhaps I'm biased. Has that wonderful Smith & Wesson double action, single action. The pre-war and World War II guns actually had a different action than the post-war. If you notice how far the hammer falls on that one, well, let's look at this old World War II warhorse. I'm not going to dry fire it too much, but these are called long action Smith & Wessons, and the hammer has a longer travel. Let's see, I can probably just cock it and show you. Yeah, that would have made more sense, wouldn't it? See how much further back the hammer goes on the World War II model than on this 80s model? The long action Smith & Wessons had this wonderfully smooth, long double action pull. However, in the post-war years, though, in an effort to compete with Colt, they revamped their action to the short action, which prioritized the single action pull. And the double action was still fine on these, but it was not quite as good as the older long action Smiths. So, these British Service Revolvers came in several different finishes. This is a fairly early one because it's blued. The later models, I believe, were either parkerized or finished in some kind of a matte black coating named Midnight Blue or something like that. The name escapes me. But this is a blued model, and they really differed fairly little from off-the-shelf Smiths. The British wanted a lanyard loop, which is kind of neat. Makes me think of Indiana Jones or something. They wanted the stocks to be smooth instead of checkered. And they mostly went with 5-inch barrels, though I believe they did order some 6s and also some 4s as well. The 5-inch was sort of the British standard. Let's look at some of the details. Notice the pinned barrel. That is a feature that Smith & Wesson later deleted on their firearms in the 80s as a cost-saving measure. Many Smith & Wesson enthusiasts consider that to be, you know, a sign of their cheapening, though it actually doesn't. It doesn't really affect the handgun in any way. Here we have Smith & Wesson's logo, along with the British proof mark, which says .38 by .767, 3.5 tons. That indicates that this was originally, as it left England, a 380 British Service, or .38 Smith & Wesson. The conversion to 38 Special must have occurred sometime here in America. Some handguns were converted in England professionally. Others were done by gunsmiths here, and still others were done by aspiring gunsmiths, we'll call them here. Here we have another British proof mark. You know, there are all sorts of people that could tell you what all these proof marks mean. I am not one of them. Perhaps I'll do another video someday doing a deep dive on the history. So it looks like all these proof marks, whether it's the BNP or this K3B with 2 crossed swords and a dot, they indicate the Birmingham proof house, and were used post-war to proof these for sale in the civilian market, is my understanding. Here we have the patent information on the top of the barrel, along with that wonderful half-round front sight that Smith & Wesson used on their early revolvers. Later, that front sight would be changed to this sort of shark fin style. It was serrated. That does offer a little bit better sight picture, but the half-round, the idea behind it was that it would insert and draw equally well from a leather holster. Let's see if I can get a good sight picture for you. Well, sort of. It doesn't focus very well, but it is a little bit of a blurry sight picture. And of course the caliber marking. Smith & Wesson did not change their nomenclature for the British. It's still marked .38 Smith & Wesson cartridge, just as it would be on the American guns. Proudly states that it is made in the USA. However, post-war, there's a bit more information in that spot. Still says made in the USA, but the post-war models say Marcas Registradas, Smith & Wesson, Springfield, Massachusetts. I've heard various stories as to that. The most common seems to be that in Spain, they would frequently copy Smith & Wesson designs, and Smith & Wesson would put this information in Spanish to combat that. Here we have the military acceptance mark, which is a P. That's the beginning of the serial number, and of course the lanyard loop. I'm not going to show you the whole thing for my own privacy's sake. This old revolver has the ribbed trigger, which I think Smith & Wesson would go on to call a semi-target trigger, versus the smooth combat trigger of the later Model 10. You can notice just how much coarsely checkered the post-war gun is versus this old pre-war or war era. Just in general, while the 80s vintage Smith & Wesson is nice, the 40s vintage is just nicer. Really does exude quality in a way few firearms do these days. I picked this up in a pawn shop a couple of months back. Oh, and for whatever reason, Smith & Wesson reversed which side of the handgun the logo is on. I believe that is because in the post-war years they wanted to be able to engrave on that side. But there you have it. I have yet to shoot this. Probably want to have somebody that knows more about these revolvers than me take a look at it first. When I first got it, the guy in the pawn shop thought, and it for all the world seemed like it had a timing issue, because it just did not work very well. I later figured out, and it wound up locking up entirely on me. It was this darn ejector rod was coming unscrewed, and it was binding up against the front locking lug. So once I was able to get that unscrewed, it worked much better. That may have been a selling point of the Colt revolvers, which did not have this front locking lug. In general, though, I think the Smith & Wessons were nicer, unless you count the Python or the Diamondback or, you know, those snake guns. So, I appreciate it if you made it this far. This has been sort of a rambly video about a topic I don't really know much about. I was mainly wanting to try the new lighting setups I had available up here. So, have a good evening.